Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Nicole and today I'm going to be sharing with you some more of the books that I have been reading recently. And I yet again have another week where I have just two books to share with you, and one of them I don't even physically have. So we're going to go ahead and start with that one. That book is Pet by Catherine Chidgey, I believe is how you say her last name. And this is a work of it's a thriller. It's also a work of literary fiction. I feel like it's an interesting blend of those two genres, which is a blend that I don't feel like comes up that frequently. Maybe it does. I don't read a lot of thrillers or things that head towards that side of the genres. This is the second book that I have read by this author, and in some ways it was very different from the first book, and let me tell you what it's about. Pet is about 12-year-old Justine, who is adjusting to life living with just her father after having lost her mother in the last year or so. And during this time period, Justine is moving along. She's in her final year of grade school, ready to move on to high school next year, and she has a new teacher. And like everyone else in her class, she very quickly becomes kind of obsessed with her teacher and wants to become the teacher's pet. Which, when I first read that premise, I was like, well, where's this gonna go? Well, it goes crazy places, but not totally weird places. And let me just tell you a little bit more. And all I can tell you is that not everything is as it should be. It's not all okay, which I feel like even from the premise of the book, you would guess that. This book, however, to my surprise, covered a lot of different topics, which it does talk about even in the flap of the book, but I was kind of like, really? Because it's also a thriller? I don't know. I took it for granted. It does cover the topics of racism, religion, favoritism in the classroom, and it is a bit of a dark academia in its vibe and tone, if you will. I thought this book was really well written. I was a little concerned about where the premise of the book was going to go and if it was going to touch on topics that I just don't like to read about in fiction, but it turned out that it was really well plotted and I was really surprised where it did and didn't go. Like I said, it definitely took a little bit of a thriller tone of like a very sort of dark academia. Even the thriller vibes of it were very light. I would say for the vast majority of the book, it was just really good built tension where you knew something was going to go wrong, and there were many places where things could go wrong, and you had no idea exactly, which shoe was going to drop, if you will. This was definitely more than just a thriller, however, and that's, I think, where the literary fiction side of it comes through. The last book that I read by this author was An Axeman's Carnival, and while that could maybe be classified as a thriller, I would say it was more on the contemporary fiction side of things, just having to deal with heavier topics. And this book also felt a lot like that. I think the author does a really good job of building complex characters and situations and keeping the story in the forefront and making it feel like a contemporary fiction novel while still addressing some really interesting themes. I felt like the topics that she did introduce were handled pretty well. However, if I had any critique, it would probably just be that I really wanted her to delve into the themes and give a stronger message on some of these things. I think it was very clear how the author felt about the different issues that she brought up, but I didn't feel like they all came together where there was one cohesive message that I felt like she was trying to convey to the reader. And maybe there was no particular message, but there were so many things brought up in the book that I thought it was a lost opportunity, I guess is what I'm saying. That said, I did really enjoy this book and I gave it 4.5 stars, which was higher than I expected. I was thinking that it was probably going to be a 4 star, but this was also the book that I did in my library haul video. And I was saying that when I took it out of the library, I hadn't even read the book and I was really kind of turned off by the way it was described and wasn't sure if it was going to be for me. And it is sort of bumping up against the genre that's a little outside my comfort zone. So I'm actually pretty impressed with the author that she managed to write about these various topics in sort of a thriller vibe, and it was still 4.5 for me. I feel like this book has made me interested in continuing to read more works by this author. Since her last book, I believe I also gave it 4 stars, and it's also making me feel a lot more confident in picking up Europa editions. I think I've mentioned multiple times that they tend to be solid 4 stars for me, but I feel like never break a 5, and I feel like they're coming closer and closer, and at the very least I feel like they're very consistently giving me 4-star books, and I can't be upset about that because I'd rather read a 4-star book than something that's a 2 or a 3, you know what I'm saying? So yeah, I'm gonna definitely keep reading things that are put out by Catherine Chidgey, and as well as things that are published by Europa Editions. And I would recommend this book to anybody who likes a really active plot. There were a lot of different things going on in this story at different times. It had a very strong first-person narrator, and even though it was a very young protagonist, she felt young in terms of her understanding of things, but the voice wasn't too young or anxious or whiny. In some ways, maybe the voice was a little unrealistic for a 12-year-old, but not to the point where I ever thought about it while I was reading the book. I think if you like some dark academia, some thriller vibes, but nothing too heavy, that this would work pretty well. Definitely check the trigger warnings though, because there are moments of all sorts of things in this book. And yeah, I think if you like your thrillers to have some deeper meanings, or at least to discuss some heavier topics and not just be, you know, slash and dab type of books, or slashers, then this is a really good book for that. And so yeah, I'm excited to pick up other works of hers. I know she has some that have recently come out, as well as a little bit of a back catalog, and I'll definitely be interested in continuing on my journey with that. The next book I have is also kind of on the like darker side. So it was a darker week, but it was a good week of reading. I finished reading Women Talking by Miriam Toews. This is one of the oldest books on my bookshelf in terms of it's been on my TBR as a book I've wanted to read for a very long time, and I've also owned it for quite a while. And this is another work of literary fiction. I believe it was published in 2024? No, that's definitely not right. I'll put up on the screen when it was published. And this was nominated for quite a few awards. I don't know if it actually ended up winning any of them. And this is about a Mennonite community in Bolivia, which is like not what I would have expected. I did not know there were Mennonite communities in there in Bolivia, but there are. And it talks a little bit in the book about how they got there. This book is set sometime between 2005 and 2009, and it talks about how the women in that community were being essayed in the middle of the night, and they brought this to the attention of the leaders in their community, and they were told that it was just a demonic attack that was probably being caused by their own sin. And as they decided to investigate, they end up discovering that something much darker and more sinister is actually going on behind these attacks. And they find themselves in a situation where they have a very short time to decide how they want to respond to these attacks and to the situation that is going on in their community. This is actually based on a true story, and you should definitely check out trigger warnings if any of the things I've said so far may be a concern for you, as well as some of the things that I haven't even talked about. This book discusses I wouldn't say in detail, but discusses, because it's a short book, but it does discuss issues of faith, power, helplessness, as well as the difficulty in having the power to make a choice. And I think it really explores the idea of the fear of unknown, and how even in a very dark circumstance, it can be difficult to get yourself out of that just because the unknown can be as scary as what you do know. The structure of this book was really fascinating. It is written as a series of minutes about the meeting that the women have in secret, and it is being written down by one of the outcast males in the community, because the women themselves are illiterate, and so yeah, so they needed someone to write down this correspondence, both for themselves as well as any future women in the community. And the gentleman that they ask to write this down, he is an outcast because he's seen as being too effeminate, partially because he doesn't farm. So there's a lot about the culture right there in that statement alone, I feel like. The highs in this book were definitely the characterization and the characters, and the way, yeah, just all of the characterization. The characters themselves were varied. You were introduced to a lot of women, in some ways to a fault, because you're introduced to a lot of characters all at once. And the style of the writing is very literary fiction, and so it's, while contemporary sounding, the structure of the writing, like there aren't any quotation marks. all the sentences can tend to flow together and it can become a little bit hard to follow. One of my least favorite things about this book actually was just that the way she described their dialogue and the way the sentences were structured led to a lot of tangents even within their conversations, and just a lot of circular like discussions and reasonings and thoughts. And some of that was supposed to be attributed to how they were actually talking about the event. And so while it wasn't my favorite thing, it also felt very appropriate that there were a lot of tangential things that were coming up, because they're kind of airing their griefs in real time, and you do get that sense in the way that the minutes are written down. Like, they're not written in shorthand or anything like that, but there was definitely a lot of focus on the writing style and how things were written down and communicating to you, the reader, just exactly how this conversation was happening, which at times was just very frustrating to read because like they're jumping from topic to topic and all around the place. And while that does really communicate how people speak, it's not always fun to read in that manner. I don't know. So it definitely, like, I was like, okay, can we just focus on the story and less on like how you're actually talking? But the answer was no. And so depending on whether you like that type of thing and how much you like literary fiction, that will probably impact how much you like this book. That said, I did still give it 4 stars. It was really well done. There were some really powerful statements, moments in this book. A lot of very fascinating questions got asked and answered and just discussed and thought about. I did learn a little bit about how Mennonite communities ended up in Bolivia and just a little bit about Mennonite communities in general. I don't know how much the author, researched this particular community or Mennonite communities in general, and so you do have sort of an outsider perspective on this in that sense. So if that's something you want to know more about, I would probably recommend you do some research on that to see how much she researched and maybe some learning of your own. But it was something that got me interested in learning more about that situation. Not necessarily this particular situation, but just Mennonites in Bolivia and other places in the world in general. Like I said, I think this would be a really good book for anyone who likes literary fiction and also historical fiction, and likes or is interested in different faith communities and seeing, the problems that come up, and may also just want a different perspective on Mennonite communities, and especially the women in Mennonite communities. I found that this book really addressed a lot of maybe biases or assumptions that I had about Mennonite women that I didn't even realize I had until I was introduced to these characters. I love this book for the strong female protagonists and characters that are in here, and again, I think this is a great look at looking at how people who feel helpless can find strength and power to make a decision for themselves, even in the face of, being ostracized and outcast and, outsiders to their communities as a result thereof, or at least potentially. So this was a good book. I'm glad that I finally picked it up. It did live up to the expectations that I had for it. And that's all I have to review for you this week. I am currently in the middle of 2 more books, so maybe next week you'll get another 2. I don't know. I'm currently buddy reading The Hearing Trumpet with Britta Bowler, and we're having an interesting time. This is like a weird book, and I knew it was going to be a weird book, but there's things about it that are even weirder than I expected. And the other book that I'm reading for a local book club is White Cat, Black Dog, and this is a selection of short stories, and this book is also just going okay. It's not weird, but it is a collection of short stories that are retellings of the Grimm's fairy tales. And like the Grimm's fairy tales, sometimes I feel like there's times where I get to the end of the story and I'm like, okay. So we'll see. I have these 2. They should both be finished in the next couple of days, and we'll see what my thoughts are on those the next time I see you in a Saturday reading wrap up. That's it for now. I hope you are doing well, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye!